In the end of this week's parsha, we have a most famous set of verses. It is the third paragraph of the Shema, which we recite twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. And it's only a few verses, and you read it, and if you actually read it carefully, it's fascinating what the Torah is proposing, what the Torah is instructing. So it begins by telling us, speak to the Israelites and tell them to make tzitzis. What's tzitzis? It's fringes on the corners of their garments for generations. And then they should place upon the fringes a cord, a string of Techeiles. Techeiles is the blue wool. So it's an instruction. It's a mitzvah. We have a mezuzah on our doorpost. We have the great privilege of wearing tefillin. We shake the lulav during the festival of Sukkot, and we eat matzah on Pesach, and we wear tzitzis, fringes, on the corners of our garments with a cord, with a string of Techeiles, of the blue colored wool. And then it tells us you should see it. And when you see it, you will remember all the mitzvos of Hashem. And you will perform them. And you will not deviate after your hearts, after your eyes, that seem to cause you to go astray, in order that you remember and you perform all the mitzvahs of Hashem. And you become holy to your God. And the final verse of this paragraph, and the final verse indeed of the parsha, is, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am Hashem your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt to be for you as a God. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am Hashem your God. It's a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 mitzvos, and that is on the corners of your garments. You made tzitzis, its streams, its fringes, with one, or maybe more, we'll see, cord of Techeiles, of blue wool. And this is so powerful because when you see it, you remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. And you're going to do them, and you won't deviate after your eyes, after your hearts. And you'll remember and perform all the mitzvahs of Hashem, and you shall become holy to your God. Now, you open up the comment of Rashi, and he already tells you, oh well, tzitzis is like a representative of all the mitzvahs. Because after all, the gematria of the word tzitzis is 600. And then there's 8 streams. So that's 608. Plus there's 5 knots. And that's 613. So it's obvious how tzitzis reminds you of all the mitzvahs. Because after all, that's the gematria plus the streams plus the knots. It's easy to remember 613. But this is a mitzvah that we have. If you have a garment that has 4 corners, you put on the corners tzitzis, 1 in every corner. And it's a wonderful, beautiful mitzvah. And it's so powerful that when you see it, you'll remember all the mitzvahs and you'll do them and you won't deviate after your heart and after your eyes. Now, the Talmud tells us that this mitzvah, and Rashi really invokes it, and the verse really says it, this mitzvah is equal to all the mitzvahs put together. This is like a representative. This is like a microcosm of all 613. And that's why the Torah can say, if you just see this one mitzvah, you'll remember all of them. It's a catch-all for all of Torah. And you open up the Talmud, and the Talmud lauds this mitzvah. Talmud says, if you are fastidious and meticulous in your performance of this mitzvah, you will merit to receive the divine presence. Wow, I'm convinced. And then you open up the Zohar, and the Zohar says, you wear your tzitzis. It's like a bulletproof vest. Because if you are garbed with your tzitzis, and you walk out of your house, you are complete. And the Almighty is happy. And the angel that wants to destroy you is banished. And you will be saved from all damage and from all destruction. That's what the Zohar says. Pretty wonderful. What I want to focus on today is the different strings, and in particular, the one string of Techeiles. So you see, this mitzvah is a blend of strings. We have strings, we have fringes. Some of them are white. And then the verse says that around the tzitzis, you should also wrap a cord of Techeiles, of blue. So the white strings, and we have this blue dyed string, and not just any blue dye. It's a specific dye called Techeiles. Now, this word appears many places in the Torah. You recall, perhaps, in the book of Exodus, we have the tabernacle, and there's the fundraising effort. And one of the items that are solicited from the Israelites is Techeiles wool. Techeiles wool and different other types of wool. There's blue wool and the purple wool, argamon, and the red wool, tola ashani. And this wool, the blue wool, the wool in question, it's going to be used for a variety of items in the tabernacle. So 4 of the high priest's 8 garments contain this material. The tzitz, which went on the forehead, it had strings made of Techeiles. And the me'il, the robe, was entirely made of Techeiles. And the choshen, the breastplate that contained the 12 stones, part of it was made out of Techeiles. And similarly, the ephod, the apron-like vestment of the high priest, contained Techeiles, and various other parts, curtains and screens and partitions in the tabernacle were made of this material. So it's present in the tabernacle, in the temple, in the vestments of the high priest. Today, of course, we don't have a temple. So in that respect, we don't really need to know about anything more about this particular wool, but we still have the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis. We say it every day multiple times. And the mitzvah of placing the Techeiles upon it, wrapping the Techeiles upon our tzitzis. Now, for a very long time, no one had the Techeiles or even claimed to have it for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you open up the literature, the Talmud already talks about it. Suppose you can't have any Techeiles, either you have no access to it, or it's outrageously expensive, as it was throughout history. There were times that it was worth more than gold. It was the most valuable commodity in the world. But suppose you have access only to the white. So the Talmud says, the Rambam brings down as the law, that there's 2 separate commandments that are each almost mutually exclusive. And if you can only fulfill one, you can still fulfill it, even though you don't have the other. It's not like it's a package deal. It's both or nothing. If you only have the white, you can fulfill the mitzvah of the white, even though you don't have the blue. And therefore, for a very, very, very long time, you couldn't find any tzitzis or any talis, which is a large tzitzis, that had any blue, because for hundreds of years, like more than 1,000 years, 1,500 years, no one knew or even claimed to know what is the animal that makes the Techeiles wool that's a mitzvah for us to wear. Now, in recent years, this animal was rediscovered, or at least so it was claimed. And it's a hotly contested issue. And the pamphleteers are back. The pamphleteers are back because there's lots of polemics, lots of debate, and lots of pamphlets proving we found it. Oh, no, we didn't found it. Oh, I have all this evidence. Here's the evidence. 15 unimpeachable proofs. Oh, and here's my counter pamphlet. There's a lot of literature about this. But the Talmud already talks about how there's a specific region in the world where the animal, the chilazon as it's known, that makes the Techeiles is found. And it's it's in the Mediterranean. And the Jews, well, they're in Israel for a long time. And the Torah already says that Zvulun, who was seafaring in his land, you're going to find the Chilazon and the Techeiles. But if the Jews are all leaving Israel and they're moving on to Babylon, and there's no access to this animal, and the generational knowledge is lost over the centuries, we don't have the Techeiles. And the Talmud talks about this. Even in the land of Israel, it's very rare. It's very hard to find. It's very expensive. And we know historically, the Romans made a decree, a rule, an edict, that this wool, because it's so precious and it's so beautiful and it's so rare, it's reserved for the aristocracy, for the royalty. And they forbade commoners from owning, trading, or using this item at all. Historically, the blue is a very rare color to have, actually. Blue is very common in our world, but historically it was basically non-existent. I see people are wearing blue all the time because today we have all these synthetic dyes and all these ways to create the blue color. But historically, this is how they made blue dye. You have to find this remote animal, and you find one of them, and you celebrate, and it gives you exactly 1/3 of an inch of dye coverage. You need thousands of them for a garment, for a king. And if the king's the only one that wears the blue, it's kind of a very important royal signature. So the Jews are out of Israel. The generational knowledge is lost. The Romans forbade individuals from using it. And the Talmud even records dialogues where the sages are discussing, like, how do we actually have the Techeiles? How do you make it? How do you dye it? And one of the sages tells the other sage, they said, well, we have to find this animal called the Chilazon. And we have to make certain chemicals and put them together and put them in a pot and boil it up. And then once you have it, you have to dip the wool into it. And then you have to measure it to see if it's the right color. It's a fascinating thing. It's a mitzvah. It's one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. And one of the sages has no idea how this mitzvah is fulfilled. How do you source the material for this mitzvah? And the reason why we have this conversation is one of those sages lived in Babylon. The other sage had recently traveled from the Holy Land, where knowledge of this science was still extant, and there was still some industry of the Techeiles. So he knew, because he had been there where the industry was. And the other sage had never been to Israel. He's in Babylon. He has no idea how it's done. And indeed, by the time 6th, 7th, 8th century comes around, there's very few Jews left in the Holy Land. Effectively, there's no more industry for any of this blue Techeiles wool. And the Midrash says it's lost. We have a mitzvah in the Torah, this week's parasha, chapter 15 of Numbers, and we cannot fulfill it. We can only fulfill part of the mitzvah, namely the white strings, not the blue strings. In modern times, the last 150 or so years, there have been many attempts to rediscover it. And it's very interesting. You open up the Talmud, there's a lot of discussion about this wool and the animal, the chilazon, that gives us this dye. And there's all sorts of clues about the identity of the chilazon and the identity of the Techeiles. And it seems like our sages are saying, I'll give you the breadcrumbs. We'll preserve whatever knowledge we have. So maybe in some future time where the dynamics are different, maybe it will be possible to rediscover the Techeiles. So Talmud says, well, the body of this animal is like the sea. That's what it says. No one knows, like, what does that even mean? The body's like the sea? Is that the color? Is that the shape? And its anatomy is similar to a fish. And then the Midrash says, well, it's not really a fish, it's more like a worm. And the Midrash says, well, it's like a worm, but it has a shell. And whenever it grows, a shell grows with it. And Talmud says, well, it's in the water, but every once in a while it comes onto the land. And you take the blood of this animal and you make the Techeiles. And in order to extract the blood, you have to crack the shell. So if you put all the clues together, it seems like it's some sort of aquatic animal that can also survive on land, and it has a shell. It sounds a little bit like a snail. That's what a mollusk. That's what almost the consensus is. The Talmud tells us, very interesting, this is an interesting clue, that the chilazon trappers who were part of the industry, when they would trap the animals, they would try to keep them alive as long as possible, because the dye would get ruined if you waited too long. You let's say, kill the animal to extract the dye, and the longer it takes, the more damage will happen to the dye. But the Talmud also says that there's some very special quality to this dye, in that it's color fast. If you wear, your favorite T-shirt from the 90s, it's probably faded by now. It's faded, right? Because that's just the nature. So you have a fabric and you dye it, and the dye is vibrant, but then you put it in the wash a couple of times and it's already a bit faded. And after a couple of years, it's very faded. And you still want to wear the T-shirt, of course, because it's my favorite. It's my favorite. Talmud says that this Techeiles, the real one, it's color fast. The color does not fade. So it seems like our sages are giving us all these tools to rediscover it. And it still is today, as I mentioned, hotly contested. And the pamphleteers, they are out in full force. But even hundreds of years ago, 150 years ago, it was hotly contested. Because some of the sages, they say, well, we lost the know-how for how to make this wool, for how to make this dye, for the identity of this particular animal. There's lots of animals that can maybe be the source. Now, how do you know? You need to have a prophet. Elijah the prophet comes, we'll listen to him. Until he comes, don't give me any proofs. I don't want any proofs. The only way to rediscover information that was lost and to know for sure is if you have a prophet. So we'll wait till Elijah. That's what some of the sages said. Nevertheless, there were other very famous rabbis that invested a lot of time in trying to rediscover this dye. The Grand Rabbi of Radzin, he spent years researching, investigating, tinkering with the chemistry. He went to the aquariums and looked at all the sea animals that we know of and tried to use all the evidence, and then took the animals and tried to see if we can make, using his chemistry knowledge, can we actually make a blue dye out of it? And then another great rabbi, who was the first chief rabbi. He was the first chief rabbi of multiple countries. He was the first chief rabbi of Ireland. And then he became the first chief rabbi of Israel. His name is Rabbi Herzog. He's a great rabbi with a phenomenal hat he wore. This top hat, a proper rabbinic hat. You can't buy it today. But his son was a great Israeli general who was also the president of Israel. And his grandson was an Israeli politician who is currently the president of Israel. It's a very prestigious family. And he wrote a doctoral thesis on the Techeiles. And he wrote a book. And he says, well, there's this one snail known as the Murex trunculus, today called the Hexaplex trunculus. This is the best candidate. It fulfills all the requirements. It is the right shape, and it's a snail, and it has a shell, and you got to crack it, and it produces amazing dye that's color fast. It doesn't diminish over time. There's only one small problem. It doesn't make any blue. There's no way to make it blue. In fact, when they would make the dye out of this animal, it would change colors. It would be yellow, and then it would turn green. And then it would turn blue. But then it would turn purple, and it would stay purple. And there was no way to make it blue, remain blue. So he's like, this is the best candidate, but it's not blue. So maybe it's not the right candidate. Maybe it's other things as well. And yeah, there was a chemist who was tinkering with the dye, and he decided to try processing it outdoors. And there was like a photosynthesis effect that when you do this in a lab it goes from yellow to green to blue to purple, and it stays there. But if you do it outdoors, there's some sort of chemical effect, photosynthesis. I passed my chemistry regents, but not by much, where it stayed blue. Wow, what an incredible discovery. And then they found all sorts of other discoveries. Archaeological evidence, ancient swatches of wool that they proved were dyed with the Murex. They found purple ones and blue ones. And the Talmud identifies the exact location in Israel where this industry was. And the archaeologists found factories, dye factories, with thousands and thousands of these snails, the Murex snails. All of them with their shells broken at precisely the right place to extract the dye. And they also discovered that if this animal, if it dies, it releases an enzyme that is used for the dye, but it decomposes very soon afterwards. So Talmud says, you want to keep the animal alive as long as possible. Like this animal would qualify. You want it alive as long as possible, because otherwise the quality of the dye is going to diminish. So it seems like they've discovered the correct animal. And I want to stress that some of the sages bristle at the evidence. Some say, well, until Elijah comes, no bueno. What do they say? Doesn't work until Elijah comes. Others say, well, the evidence is not persuasive because maybe it means some other animal. So yes, you have a lot of evidence, but maybe there's counter evidence. And the evidence, it's not. Talmud says it's like a fish. Well, if it's a snail, snail's not a fish. So why would the Talmud say it's like a fish, or its anatomy is like a fish? What does that even mean? And the Talmud says, well, it comes onto the land every 70 years. Now, what does that even mean? Every 70 years, you got to wait for 70 years for it to come on the land? And the others say, well, no, because the Talmud uses the term every 70 years. It's like the Talmudic shorthand for every blue moon, right? The blue moon doesn't mean every blue moon. It means every once in a while. It's not rare. It's rare, but it happens on occasion. So the Talmud, in this is the place, this place, this place, and it says every 70 years, doesn't mean exactly every 70 years. It means every once in a while. A lot of that debate. Others say, well, the evidence is pretty good, but it's kind of not the establishment. Not all the great sages have accepted the evidence. So maybe if you do wear it, maybe just tuck it in. Don't pick any fights with people. I know some people that they just keep it inside. No one knows. And then when they wear their tallis that you can't hide, they just keep it white. I don't want to fight with people. Others like to fight. They embrace it. But regardless, many communities have accepted the evidence, both the evidence from the Talmud and the scientific evidence, archaeological evidence, and have indeed placed the Techeiles back on their tzitzis for the first time in more than 1,000 years. Many communities and lots of individuals, and it's growing fairly rapidly. And I will say that I personally am convinced, and I personally do wear the Techeiles, and I'm not scared of it, and I don't tuck it in. And if you want to come debate with me, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. But what I want to say today is that if you read the literature about this mitzvah, you find just an amazing thing, that this reminds you of all the mitzvahs. It's representative of all the mitzvahs. And if you see it, if you see the tzitzis, you'll remember all the mitzvahs and perform them. And you won't deviate after your heart and after your eyes. And you open up the literature, Talmud says something unbelievable. Why did the Almighty use this color in particular? Why the blue? So Talmud tells us, because the blue, it reminds us of the sea. And if you think of the sea, then maybe you'll think about the heavens. And if you think of the heavens, you'll think about God and the throne of glory. And that's the power of this blue. And it tell us that if there's white and there's the cord of blue around it, that's highly symbolic. Because the white, that's representative of the body. And the blue is representative of the soul. And when we're told you have to take the blue and wrap it around the white, that's teaching us a very profound lesson. We have the body of the soul, and it's very important for us to make sure that the soul is in control. It is wrapped around and controlling the body to prevent the body from going awry and running amok. We have to bind the blue on top of the white to indicate that the soul is dominant over the body. But the Talmud tells us a very strange thing. The blue reminds you of the oceans or the seas. And when you think about that, you'll think of the heavens. And when you think of the heavens, then you'll remember God and the throne of glory. So the Talmud tells us that's why the blue was selected. And that maybe is the interpretation of the verse, right? You'll remember all the mitzvos, and you'll do all the mitzvos. Why would looking at the tzitzis remind you of all the mitzvos and make you do all the mitzvos? Well, says the Talmud, this may be one idea is that, well, it's the blue reminds you of this, which reminds you of that, which reminds you of that, which reminds you of God, which reminds you of the mitzvos. So when you look at the tzitzis, that's what you're supposed to think. The blue, the sea. And the sea, the heaven. And the heaven, well, that's a pretty easy jump to the throne of glory. That's what the Talmud tells us. Now, the Midrash has an even more elaborate journey. The blue will remind you of the grasses. And the grasses will remind you of the sea. And the sea will remind you of the heavens. And the heavens will remind you of the rainbows. And the rainbows will remind you of the clouds. And the clouds will remind you of the throne. And the throne, well, that will remind you of the throne of glory. It's a very strange teaching in the Talmud. And you have to understand, what's the Talmud trying to tell us? What's this idea that the Techeiles is so powerful? It's to remind you of God, but how is it going to remind you of God? So we have one idea, well, maybe it's representative of the soul, and that's supposed to bind up the body. But we have the second idea, that it's supposed to remind you of one thing, not quite God yet, that will remind you of another thing, and then you'll be on this journey. And eventually the end of the journey is you'll think about the throne of glory, you'll remember God and his mitzvos. So I want to share with you a very profound approach. If you read the verses carefully, there is two sides that are presented. The verse says, you made the fringes, you made the tzitzis, you put the cord of blue, and you should see them and remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem, and you should perform them. That's what you will see. Velo sasuru, and you will not deviate after your hearts and after your eyes. So we have the positive, you'll have the tzitzis, you'll have the blue, and you'll remember God and all the mitzvahs, and you'll do them. That's the positive. And then there's what you will avoid. You will avoid the negative. You will not deviate after your hearts and after your eyes. And Rashi tells us something very profound. How does someone make mistakes? How does someone sin? How's it possible that someone could go against the will of God? It's outrageous. It's indefensible. It's unconscionable. It's totally baffling. How is it possible someone could violate the will of God? So Rashi tells us that the verse tells us the progression of how it works. The verse says, you will not deviate after your hearts, after your eyes. The way a person can deviate away from God, it's not like straightforward. Oh, I want to sin. I want to violate the will of God. That's not how it works. It works where your heart and your eyes, they facilitate the sin. How so? Your eye sees something and your heart covets that thing, and your body sins. There's this unholy alliance. You're going to deviate away from God after your hearts, after your eyes. But you'll avoid that thanks to the tzitzis. What the verse is telling us, again, is a very profound idea. To sin, it's almost a convoluted process. Your eyes see something, and then your heart covets, desires, lusts that thing. Well, why does your heart lust? Only because your eyes saw it. So this would be a process, a progression. Your eyes see, heart covets, and then it culminates when the body actualizes the sin. So a sin is the result of multiple stages. And if you want to avoid sinning, well, you could stop it at multiple stages. Either your heart doesn't see, or either your eyes don't see, or your heart does not covet, or your body doesn't do the sin. But obviously, once there's momentum, right? Your eyes see and your heart covets, it's very hard to stop. It's better where your eyes don't see, and then you don't have to muster up all this fortitude to stop the sin that's already in progress, as it were. But that's what the tzitzis will help us avoid, the verse tells us. In effect, what we're seeing is a solution to sin. The verse is telling us, you see, the tzitzis, you do all the mitzvos. This is the panacea. You'll solve all the problems with the tzitzis. How so? Because when you see the tzitzis, you'll remember something else. I don't know, the water. And then you'll remember something else. The heavens. And then you remember something else. You'll remember God. And that's the opposite side of the coin of your eyes see, your heart covets, and your body sins. In effect, what we're discovering here is that your mind, your imagination, can work in an unguided fashion, where your eye sees something and that kind of triggers something which leads to something which leads to mistakes. That's what the sources are telling us. The Talmud even says, don't look at things that are even remotely associated with sin, because once you expose something to your eyes, it could lead eventually to your heart and eventually to sinning and to repudiating God. And therefore, instead, what you should do is you have to hijack the system. Instead of seeing bad things that will lead you to bad places, see good things. Look at your tzitzis. Look at your tzitzis and begin a process of fantasizing, a meandering reverie that, oh, this is blue. What else is blue? Oh, okay. The seas, the heavens, and eventually the same process that can lead to sin will lead you to God. That's what the Talmud is telling us. There's uncontrolled imagination that can lead us to bad places. Hijack the system. Use this process of uncontrolled imagination to lead us to very good places. And that is the Techeiles. You read the verse now, you find something very profound. Uri isemo so. You see the tzitzis with the Techeiles, and you remember all the mitzvos of Hashem, and you perform all the mitzvos, and you do not deviate after your hearts, after your eyes. Your mind is a slippery thing. It can lead you to very unfortunate places. And there's two very opposing ways that this can work. With the tzitzis and the blue thread, we can have a very helpful and productive and beneficial and even holy reverie. And that will help us avoid another process where the eye sees, the heart covets, and the body sins. And that's the lesson of the Techeiles. It lets your mind wander in a productive fashion. And what's the result of all of this? So you remember. And you perform all the mitzvahs of God. And you become holy to God. Once you start this process with tzitzis, again, it's the panacea. You start the process and you begin dreaming of heaven, dreaming of the throne, dreaming of God. You have the outline of a plan that if you are to execute upon, you can indeed become holy to God, meaning you can become close to God. You can achieve proximity with God. And the first step is outlined in the tzitzis. And that creates almost like the dream, the vision, the journey. And the journey, the end point is the throne of glory. The Midrash tells us something. If you read the Midrash, it's like, this doesn't make any sense. Every Israelite must hope that their deeds should match the deeds of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's very unlikely, I'll say even more boldly, it's completely unlikely that any one of us will ever achieve parity with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But it's imperative for every person to have a dream by which they achieve superstardom. And this is embodied by the tzitzis, where just seeing this, it's a way to create the picture, the format, the roadmap, whereby I'll remember all the mitzvahs and do all the mitzvahs and not do any sin. Why? Because I'm creating for myself a bridge to heaven, a bridge to the throne of God. And I have a vision for that. And now I have a plan that if I were to implement, I will achieve holiness to God. It's the end of our parsha. We read it multiple times a day. It's imperative for us to try to internalize this message. When I started wearing my Techeiles about 8 or so years ago, I was a little sheepish about it. Well, I don't know. Is it real? Let me investigate. Oh, it seems like it's real and the evidence is super airtight. So fine, I'll put it on, but maybe I'll make a stipulation and I'll say, well, if I want to stop wearing it, I'm not making a vow to wear it. Today, I'm so convinced it's the real one. I would say it's legit. And I do feel that it has helped me personally in having better aspirations and better dreams. And this idea that the human mind can sometimes be like unregulated and could arrive at crazy places, could jump from thing to thing to thing to thing, and eventually end up in very bad places or very good places. And the Techeiles will help us to arrive at good places and create a format, a vision, a game plan to reach closeness to God. I believe that the Techeiles is legit because I feel like I've sensed that within myself. It's an incredible opportunity. It's a wonderful mitzvah, and we're fortunate that the Almighty has enabled us to rediscover it after many years. Some say, well, if it's hidden away, there must be a good reason why it's hidden away. And it's only if it could only be restored in times of Messiah, maybe we have to wait for Elijah the prophet. But again, there's a lot of things around us that are indications of the imminence of Messiah coming. For example, the fact that there's like 10 million Jews living in Israel, like that was something that's reserved for times of Messiah, the ingathering of the exiles, and that's kind of happening in front of our eyes. So it's not a shock that the Almighty will enable us to rediscover the Techeiles, and it's an incredible mitzvah. You see it, you see the tzitzis, with the Techeiles, and you remember all the mitzvahs of God, and now you have a path to fulfill them all. My address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. Please send me your questions and your comments and your feedback.